Some battles are fought in courtrooms. Some battles are fought in neighborhoods. But the worst ones are fought over power. One woman tried to take everything from a war hero, and she had no idea the storm she had awakened. Before we begin, subscribe for more stories where justice always finds its way home, no matter how powerful the villain believes they are. Captain America never imagined that life after serving his country would feel like another battleground. He returned home to New York State, seeking peace, to a quiet lakeside neighborhood that looked like a picture pulled from a dream. A private cabin by the water, tall trees guarding the shoreline, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine. It was everything he thought real freedom meant. This cabin was more than just property. It was a promise. He had bought it in honor of his father, a man who dreamed of owning a peaceful retreat, but passed away before that dream could come true. Captain America believed he had finally built a place where joy could replace memories of war, where the healing could truly begin. But peace has a way of attracting those who have never wanted it for others. Across the street lived Karen. To the world, she was HOA president, the one who enforced rules, organized meetings, and smiled in neighborhood newsletters. But behind closed doors, she was consumed by control. She believed the entire neighborhood belonged to her, including the lake, the lawns, the parking spots, even the air above the houses if she could claim it. The moment Captain America signed the deed, she started watching his every move. Every small thing became a complaint. The color of his siding, the style of his boat, the placement of his American flag. Even the sound of him opening his mailbox seemed too loud to her. She would walk past his property like she was inspecting a crime scene, writing notes about imaginary violations. And he ignored her until one day a letter arrived. A notice of unauthorized structure, stamped by the HOA. Apparently, his father's fishing dock, the one he rebuilt himself, was now a violation. The dock that had stood there for years before he even moved in was suddenly a threat to Karen's power. He went straight to the HOA office. But Karen wasn't interested in rules, only submission. She told him he would be fined daily until the dock was removed. The fines piled up like a mountain designed to break him financially. Still, he refused to give in. So Karen escalated the war. One morning, he woke to the sound of trucks. Loud engines, voices shouting commands. He rushed outside and froze. Karen had listed his lake cabin for sale, without his consent. A "Showing Today" sign stood hammered into the soil like a spear. Real estate agents walked around his yard as if they owned the land. Strangers peeked into windows. A family stood on his dock, bouncing on the wood his hands had built, evaluating it like merchandise. Because to Karen, that's all his memories were. Merchandise. Captain America confronted her right there in the open. Karen smiled, a cold smile, and lifted a stack of papers claiming that the HOA bylaws gave her the authority to sell any property in violation to recover fines. She had twisted the rules to justify theft. The neighborhood watched, some with pity, others with amusement. No one dared challenge her. She was unstoppable, or so she believed. Captain America walked back inside holding the notice, his hands shaking, not from fear, but from the old pain of losing everything he loved. He felt like a soldier again, standing on the edge of a battlefield. But this time, the enemy wasn't from another country. The enemy was a neighbor wearing a fake smile and holding authority like a weapon. He vowed he would not lose this home. Not again. There was only one way to fight this kind of war, with intelligence, with patience, with strategy. He started digging, not in the dirt, in the records, the HOA documents, meeting minutes, property law, ownership history, power of sale rules, penalties, restrictions, add-ons, exemptions, appeals. And that's when he found his first weapon. Karen's house was technically owned by the HOA, not by her personally. Not only that, Karen had violated multiple bylaws herself. Her backyard deck didn't meet measurements. Her decorative fencing wasn't approved, and she had a shed too close to the road, the very same violation she fined others for. Hypocrisy had never been written so clearly. Captain America kept digging, and he uncovered a financial scandal. Karen had been using HOA funds for personal necessities, including spa days, expensive dinners, HOA business trips, and a new 4x4 luxury SUV that she claimed was purchased for community patrol. He now had ammo, but the final discovery was a bomb. The HOA had never been legally registered with the county. Every rule, every fine, every threat. All invalid Karen's empire was built on air, but Captain America wasn't ready to strike yet. Not until he could make sure she could never recover. Not until the community she controlled could finally breathe again. He smiled for the first time in months, a smile filled with strategy, because he had finally found her weakness. If Karen believed she could sell his home, then he would take hers, and not quietly, not kindly. He would end her rule in front of everyone. Right where she believed she was strongest. Right where her power lived. The sun set behind the lake as he prepared for a different kind of war. A war not fought with shields and explosions, but with justice. And in the darkness of that night, a new battle for freedom began, to be continued. Sophie thought she understood how this community worked. Quiet smiles, gated streets, and the illusion of perfection. But the sale listing proved something darker was hiding beneath that polished surface. For the first time, she realized someone here wanted her gone. And not just gone, erased. That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. Every shadow in the cabin felt like eyes watching her. She kept replaying the listing in her mind, the photos taken inside her home. Possibly while she was there, someone had walked through her private space without hesitation, without fear of being caught. The sound of footsteps outside snapped her attention toward the window. At first, she assumed it was a raccoon or deer, but then she heard it. Soft whispers. Human whispers. Slowly, she stepped toward the glass, careful not to make a sound. Through the thin curtains, she noticed two silhouettes near her driveway, one carrying a clipboard with a flashlight, HOA Patrol. They were measuring the width of her driveway. Her heart pounded, anger choking her fear. She knew this wasn't random. Maria was escalating, trying to build a case against her. Sophie backed away before they noticed she was awake, but she memorized that moment.
They wanted a fight.
They would get one, but not tonight. The next morning, Sophie marched into the HOA office armed with printouts of the illegal listing. Maria sat behind her desk, sipping tea, completely unbothered. When Sophie handed her the papers, Maria barely glanced at them and smirked. The HOA board approved the sale, she said, as if announcing weather. The cabin does not reflect the community's standards. It must go. Sophie felt heat flush through her face. It's my property! Maria tapped her nails impatiently on the desk. Actually, that paperwork is pending review. That was it. The game wasn't about rules. It was about power. Sophie left the building furious but more determined than ever. She rushed to the county records office, pulled every legal document tied to the cabin, and confirmed what she already knew. The property legally belonged to her, and nothing in any covenant gave HOA the authority to sell it. They were bluffing, and now Sophie had proof. But she needed a bigger counterattack. She spent the next few days blending in, cutting the grass, fixing the old fence, installing security cameras. To anyone watching, she looked like she had surrendered and was trying to fit in. But behind the scenes, she was digging deeper into the HOA's finances and leadership structure. She studied meeting archives, property maps, and recorded disputes. Everything pointed back to Maria. Her name was on every enforcement action, every fine, every foreclosure. And then Sophie found something shocking. Maria's house sat on a strip of land connected to a private access road. That road passed through a tiny piece of property owned by the original lake developer, never transferred to HOA, and recently listed in the county auction database. If no one bought that land within 10 days, HOA would claim it. Sophie didn't breathe for a full 30 seconds. That small plot, that single slice of land, was the only legal access to Maria's driveway. If Sophie bought it before HOA did, Maria would have no legal way to enter or exit her own home. For the first time since she arrived, Sophie smiled. She wasn't going to save her cabin. She was going to flip the board. And she was going to win. She wasted no time. She hired a local lawyer, one who knew all about HOA corruption cases. Together, they filed paperwork, secured the land purchase, and transferred ownership into her name within the week. The moment she signed the deed, a wave of relief flooded her chest. But that relief twisted into excitement, the kind someone feels before a storm hits. The power dynamic had shifted. Tonight, she decided, she would celebrate quietly. The lake glowed in the moonlight as she lit a small fire outside her cabin. The crisp breeze whispered triumph. For once, she allowed herself to feel safe, but fate never gives victory so easily. Around midnight, a violent pounding echoed across her front door. Sophie froze. The fire crackled beside her, casting long shadows behind her. When the pounding didn't stop, she stepped inside and grabbed the nearest sturdy object, a cast-iron pan. She swung the door open, ready for anything. Maria stood there, face twisted in rage, her phone's flashlight shaking in her hand. "What did you do?" Maria hissed. "Why can't I access my driveway?" "My car is stuck." Sophie kept herself calm, gripping the pan like armor. "I bought the land," she said simply, voice steady. "You'll need my permission now." Maria's expression contorted, shock, disbelief, and something darker. "This community won't protect you," she whispered. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Sophie stepped closer, refusing to show fear again. "Neither do you." Maria stormed off into the darkness, her threats disappearing with her footsteps. As Sophie locked the door behind her, a chill crawled up her spine. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Later that night, security alerts pinged on Sophie's phone. The cameras she'd installed captured headlights sweeping across her property. Multiple cars, multiple people. The HOA wasn't going to surrender quietly. Sophie's pulse quickened as she watched the figures linger near her cabin, whispering, filming, plotting. She realized she had moved from being their target to being their enemy. The line had been crossed. No way back now. She pressed record on her phone and documented everything. Every violation, every trespass, every threat. She didn't choose this war. But she would finish it, because this lake, this cabin, was her home, and no HOA tyrant would take that from her. Yet deep inside, she sensed something bigger. Maria wasn't acting alone. There were others hiding behind her, and they had already begun their next move. As a faint thunder rolled over the lake, the reflection of dark clouds formed on the water's surface, like the storm building in Sophie's life. The next showdown was approaching, and someone was going to break. The moment the sealed notice was removed from my cabin door, something inside me shifted forever. The fear I once felt toward Karen and her HOA cronies was gone, replaced by a cold, unwavering resolve. They had crossed a line, and now it was my turn. I wasn't going to sit quietly while Karen tried to erase my family legacy. I would protect what was mine, and I would expose what she really was beneath her polished smile and iron-fisted rules. But Karen wasn't done. The next morning, I found a new violation letter taped aggressively across my fence. It accused me of unauthorized repairs and threatened immediate fines. I hadn't even touched the property. She was fabricating reasons to punish me, to drain every dollar I had until I would be forced to sell. That was her strategy: pressure, intimidation, suffocation. She underestimated me. I began documenting everything. Every letter, every confrontation, every violation notice with false claims. I installed cameras facing the road, the dock, and the entry posts. If she so much as breathed wrong near my land, I would have footage. Meanwhile, I researched property records. I wanted to know exactly how this HOA operated. What I discovered shocked me. Karen didn't just run the HOA. She owned the land that controlled the only road access into the entire lake community. Every single property owner paid her fees for road maintenance, boat permits, even lake access. That meant she had power no one dared challenge. Until now, if she could weaponize ownership, so could I. I met quietly with the previous HOA treasurer for coffee in town. He retired years ago and avoided the lake ever since. His hands shook as he sipped his drink. He told me how Karen had forced him out when he questioned her spending. She kept no transparent records. Lakeside funds disappeared every year, and any resident who complained was crushed by lawsuits or threats. Many families had already moved away. "This community used to be paradise," he whispered. "She turned it into her empire. It lit a fire inside me. My father loved this cabin. He trusted this place. And Karen corrupted it into her personal kingdom. I promised myself I would tear down her throne brick by brick. I dug deeper. Public records showed something even more interesting. Karen was in debt. Massive debt. She refinanced her own home 3 times. She hid it well behind her expensive outfits and HOA vehicles. But the truth was simple. The tyrant was crumbling from the inside. All she needed was one financial push, one critical blow, to collapse everything she built. That blow would come from me, but first I needed my cabin fully secure. The realtor contacted me again with a fake smile, pretending none of this chaos existed. He tried convincing me to list the cabin before ongoing HOA complications affect the value further. His wording gave away everything. He was Karen's puppet. She wanted a quick sale. She wanted me gone. I told him I wasn't selling. His artificial smile twitched. That afternoon, Karen herself marched down to my dock with 2 HOA enforcers behind her, each wearing those ridiculous security vests with the HOA logo printed like they were federal agents. They recorded my cabin with clipboards in hand, pointing out imaginary problems. Karen smirked when she saw the cameras capturing every second. She tried to look unfazed, but I saw it, fear flickering at the edge of her eyes. Good. She was finally realizing I wasn't prey. As they marched away, mud from my land stuck to their fancy shoes. I took a deep breath. This wasn't just a dispute anymore. It was a war. That night I made my most important decision yet. If Karen was determined to take away my property, I would take away hers. I reached out to a private buyer who specialized in distressed homes. I emailed him public records of Karen's debt situation. He responded in less than an hour. Interested. Very interested. If we moved quickly, we could buy her house from the bank before she even realized it was for sale. I stared at the email, heart pounding. Was I really about to do this? Was I really capable of striking back with the same ruthless force she used against everyone? Yes, absolutely, this wasn't revenge. This was justice. The cabin wasn't just wood and windows. It was memories. My father teaching me to fish at sunrise, the smell of pine after rain, the echo of laughter bouncing off the calm lake water. Karen thought she could erase that foundation, but I would show her that some roots run too deep to be ripped out. Over the next week, every spare moment was spent gathering documents, signing forms, attending meetings with suits who were eager to topple the HOA queen. We worked quietly, leaving no trail. The bank approved the purchase faster than expected. The papers were ready. The house would soon belong to me. Imagine the look on her face when she learned that the very man she tried to crush now owned her home, her pride, her fortress, her control, and then I would block her driveway completely. Her authority would crumble in one glorious moment, and the entire lake community would see the truth. Karen wasn't powerful. She was just loud. The night before the final signing, I stood at the edge of the dock, staring at the reflection of the moon rippling on the lake's surface. It was silent, peaceful, just like it should be. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, justice would finally begin. But even as I breathed in that calm air, headlights suddenly appeared on the road. Multiple vehicles, the HOA trucks. They stopped at my gate. Flashlights swept through the darkness. Karen had one last move. They came prepared, fueled by desperation, determined to stop me before the sun rose and everything became theirs to lose. But I was ready for them. The news of Karen's missing records spread like wildfire throughout the HOA. Many residents had already been fed up with her controlling behavior. But now, they had proof of her negligence. Fearless questions started rising in community meetings. Where are the funds, Karen? Why did our lake maintenance fee increase? Why did you list his cabin for sale without legal grounds? Karen's face would turn pale, then red, then pale again. Her voice trembled as she tried to give excuses. Those files were stolen. He destroyed them. I didn't even need to defend myself. People saw the truth with their own eyes. One evening, as I was reviewing cabin repair plans, I received a text from Karen. Undo the barricade in front of my house. Now, I couldn't leave my driveway today. I replied with a simple message. Private property. HOA rules, right? You love those. A storm was brewing outside, thunder shaking the roofs. I stepped onto my porch with a cup of coffee, enjoying the sound of rain. From afar, I could see Karen outside her house, arguing with a tow truck driver who refused to help her remove the barricade without permission. She kicked the ground like a furious child. But then her anger escalated into desperation. She marched toward my cabin in the heavy rain, umbrella flipping in the wind, her hair soaked. Makeup smudging like war paint. She pounded on my door. You think you can do this to me? I am the HOA. I can make your life. I opened the door calmly and stared right into her furious eyes. You already tried to destroy mine. Now you're just facing consequences for your own actions. Lightning flashed behind her, illuminating her defeated expression. She stepped back, shaking with rage, maybe fear too. This isn't over, she hissed, then stormed back into the night. But as she left, I noticed something new in her body language. She wasn't just angry anymore. She was terrified of losing control, terrified of being exposed, terrified of me, and honestly, I loved every second of it. News travels faster than any truck in a small lake community. As dawn broke over Silver Maple Lake, my inbox flooded with messages. Lawyers, neighbors, reporters, everyone suddenly awake to the story the HOA had tried to bury. The footage from the night of the checkpoint, the list of falsified fines, the financial inconsistencies, they were no longer whispers. They were evidence. They were real. They were public. I moved carefully, aware that speed now mattered more than secrecy. The plan I had set in motion weeks earlier was precise because it had to be. If I wanted to break the HOA's hold on the neighborhood, I had to remove the foundation of the hold, that property that controlled so many things. That meant buying the land slice that gave access to Karen's home. That meant buying her house. Not because I wanted her harm, but because she had weaponized her ownership against us. The bank agreed to a quick sale. The buyer, quiet, sharp, experienced in distressed assets, was ready to act fast. We worked in the gray hours before the market fully woke. Wire transfers, scanned signatures, a closing scheduled at midday. I watched the clock as if it were a detonator. This was not a battlefield of bullets, but of contracts and timing could be as lethal as any charge. By noon, the deed was stamped. Karen's house belonged to me. The realization felt surreal, like stepping off a small cliff, vertigo mixed with triumph. I considered the absurdity. The woman who had stepped into my yard with a triumphant smile was now legally a resident with no guaranteed access, no literal path to leave. The map of property lines had shifted silently, and with it, the geometry of her power. I did not celebrate with fireworks. Instead, I arranged for the new deed to be recorded properly with the county clerk and for notices to be sent to affected utility companies, water, cable, road maintenance, clarifying the change of ownership. The point was not to humiliate. It was to make undeniable what had happened legally. It was a procedural coup that would ripple through every paper trail Karen had used to justify her rules. That afternoon, as the news spread, whispers became conversations. My neighbors stopped avoiding me in the grocery aisle. Old men who had once nodded warily now offered firm handshakes. A single mother down the road hugged me and said quietly, "We didn't know how to stand up." Her voice was small, but folded inside it was gratitude and pain. They had been living under a regime of petty tyrannies for years, and they didn't know how to fight back until someone showed them it could be done. Karen was frantic. She called the old treasurer, the real estate agent, and the HOA attorney in quick succession, words hissing through the phone. Every call was a small panic. She came to my property that evening, drenched from a storm, mask of composure slipping. Her eyes darted to the map posted on my porch, an official copy of the deed line, and then to the barricade we had placed on the small access strip she had relied on for years. She banged on the gates like a caged animal, demanding to be let in, her voice cracking into the night. Her supporters were not eager to help. Those who had once followed her orders now watched from porches, uneasy. The momentum had shifted, and in public the momentum is everything. Power that depends on silence unravels when the silence ends. Voices that once mouthed her lines now asked awkward questions. "What about the funds?" one neighbor muttered. Why did our fees double 2 years ago? Another asked, who authorized the new patrol vehicles? The more questions surfaced, the more paper trails came in as neighbors dug into records and old emails. My phone rang again. A county investigator had arrived and wanted to see the documents. We met in the public recorder's office under fluorescent lights that strip any vanity away. I laid out evidence in neat stacks, the falsified invoices, the unauthorized transfers, the recorded meetings in which decisions were made with no quorum. The investigator looked up from the pages, then at me, then back at the stacks. She was not surprised so much as measured. "We'll open a full inquiry," she said. Her voice had the flat calm of someone used to unraveling lies. That night, as the press circulated the documents and the county began to lock files, Karen's allies responded in a predictable way: legal threats. Lawyers with glossy headshots wrote letters demanding retraction, accusing me of slander and threatening countersuits. Subpoenas arrived, stern and cold. But the law is a blunt instrument when wielded with the light of truth. Each subpoena was matched by a verified document. Each threat by a recorded statement. Their legal theater was loud, but it was not bulletproof. Yet the battle for public opinion was not won solely in courtrooms. It was won in the small, ordinary interactions where people recognized their neighbors as human. The single mother who hugged me came to our small community meeting that weekend and spoke, brave, clear, and raw. She described how fines had eaten her savings, how a letter from the HOA once threatened foreclosure for a minor violation, how the fear of constant penalties had kept her from reporting a serious safety issue on the beach. People listened. Faces changed. Silence thinned. The HOA board scrambled. They called an emergency session, but few showed up. Members were wary of being recorded or asked to justify themselves under oath. A few tried to defend Karen out of habit or fear, but their defenses sounded thin when placed beside the pile of documents. The treasurer who once trembled at her calls finally stood up and publicly testified that funds had been diverted. His voice carried the weight of a man who had watched his town diminish dollar by dollar. By week's end, the county issued letters of notice, formal audits, freezes on certain accounts, and suspension of some HOA enforcement powers pending investigation. The sheriff's office opened a case file. A local reporter ran an expose. The community that had once bowed now hovered between relief and bewilderment. The embers of fear remained, but the fog of intimidation had lifted. Still, the sharpest moment arrived quietly on a rainy Thursday morning. Karen attempted to drive out past the newly posted notice on her driveway, and her car stalled before the gate. She pounded on the windows, then shredded the posted notice in a fit that looked like a private breakdown broadcast in public. Cameras recorded her, neighbors watched, and the footage moved in minutes from cell phones to news segments. She was not arrested that day, but something worse had happened. The face she presented to the community was exposed, no veneer, no polished smile, vulnerability and raw anger on display. That image would follow her. As I watched the footage, I felt no glee. The victory felt practical and necessary. We had reclaimed our neighborhood's right to be more than someone's ledger. We had shown that systems can be leveraged to protect, not oppress. But beneath that practical relief, I understood the work ahead. Corruption, once rooted, is replaced slowly by trust, transparency, and time. Restoration would take longer than a headline. When the rain passed and the first thin light of evening came, neighbors gathered outside the community hall. This time the talk was different. There was talk of forming a new transparent committee, hiring an independent auditor, replacing volunteer patrols with community-owned emergency systems. The conversation was serious, adult, and hopeful. Some looked at me with gratitude. Others with the wary curiosity of people asked to change their habits after years of fear. That night, alone on my porch, I watched the moon stitch silver along the lake. The house felt fragile and precious. The deed was recorded, the files secured, and the inspector had opened an inquiry. It was enough for now. Yet I knew other forces were watching. Not just neighbors, but those who profited from quiet control. The bank of power that had enabled Karen to accumulate influence might be larger than we imagined. The next morning, a new courier arrived carrying an unmarked envelope. Inside was a terse note. "We are watching. Back off. No signature. No phone number. A simple threat. It was a reminder that the battle had changed shape.
It was no longer a fight between a man and a
woman in a small town. It had become a conflict that had attracted attention from parties that prefer influence over headlines, folded the note and placed it in the evidence pile. The enemy of the people often hides behind formalities and friendly faces. We had won a battle, not the war. My neighbors slept a little easier that week, but I stayed vigilant. The deed was one link removed from a chain of control. Break too many links at once and the chain will snap. That was the plan. As dusk fell, I walked down to the dock. A light mist rose from the water, and frogs called the night awake. The lake looked unchanged, as if nothing had happened. But underneath that placid mirror, everything had shifted. The shape of power in Silver Maple Lake would never be the same. Tomorrow would bring interviews and subpoenas, meetings and audits. But tonight, for the first time in a long stretch, I allowed myself to breathe.